Alright, hey guys, welcome back for an in-depth look at Chapter 4 of The Great Gatsby. Here is where the story is finally kind of laid bare. We understand all the character motivations at this point, so let's go ahead and take a look back at just some of the basic plot points, and then we'll go back through and close read some sections, alright? Gatsby comes to pick Nick up and drive him into New York City. He wants him to meet one of his friends, and on the way there, he is kind of showing off all sorts of things to Nick. He first tells him that he had gone to Oxford. He also says that he was a war hero at the Battle of Argonne Forest, which is kind of one of these landmark battles in World War I. And he had pushed forward so far that, he was recognized for his bravery by many nations, including little Montenegro, who gave him a medal for his accomplishments. As if saying those things was not enough, Gatsby brings evidence of his accomplishments, right? He shows Nick a picture of him at Oxford with a couple of his friends, and then he also gives him the medal that he received from Montenegro. So it's kind of like, I'm going to tell you I'm awesome, and then in case you don't believe me, I'm going to show it to you, right? So again, continuing on this trend from Chapter 3, we understand Gatsby is really trying to impress Nick for some reason. And he is going to ask a favor of him, and if impressing Nick into doing the favor for him is not enough, we see that Gatsby goes on to try and intimidate Nick as well.
Here, I'm from Montenegro.
Major J. Gatsby for valor extraordinary.
That's right. And this is something I always carry with me, a souvenir of Oxford days. I was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Doncaster.
What could I say? The photograph was undoubtedly authentic. Could it all be true?
But of course you don't need to take my word for it, old sport. At lunch today, I'm going to introduce you to one of New York's most distinguished businessmen, a Mr. Meyer Wolfsheim.
That intimidation comes in the form of Meyer Wolfsheim, Gatsby's friend. Nick and Gatsby arrive for lunch in what is essentially a speakeasy, right? This kind of underground bar where they you secretively can consume alcohol during Prohibition era. Gatsby, Wolfsheim, and Nick sit down for lunch, and it's funny because they don't even have lunch, right? At one point, shortly after they sit down, Gatsby gets up and leaves Wolfsheim alone with Nick. And we start to learn that Wolfsheim is not one of those friends that you would be proud to kind of bring around your other friends, I guess. Wolfsheim is certifiably a gangster, right? Gatsby claims that Wolfsheim fixed the 1919 World Series. It's a historical event, so Fitzgerald's readers would have understood that Wolfsheim historically is a mobster, right? Wolfsheim continuously makes reference and allusion to historical gangster events such as the shooting at the Metropole, and we just understand, if we're a well-educated reader or well-versed in the 1920s, Meyer Wolfsheim is probably a gangster. And another question I'd pose to you before I go any further is, how do you think Gatsby made his money? It's not really revealed to us yet, but something to think about. Gatsby is new money, again, which is a type of wealth that is, the newly rich, right? He's never had money before, and he's having it now for the first time. So how might someone suddenly amass a large amount of wealth in the 1920s? Something to think about. When Gatsby leaves Nick and Wolfsheim alone, Wolfsheim seems to know exactly what to do, as if Gatsby had asked him to do this, right? He starts complimenting Gatsby and saying some weird compliments too, like, that guy would never look at your wife, right? What a weird compliment to give a guy. He says he's a war hero. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Nick's, staring at him, talking to him, fixated on his nose for some reason. Wolfsheim says, "See, you're looking at my cuff buttons." He's not. It's a kind of very not subtle way of drawing Nick's attention to the cuff buttons. And what are the cuff buttons made of? Finest specimen of human molar.
Any luck, Senator?
What a gentleman. From one of the finest families in the Midwest. Sadly all dead now. When I first made the pleasure of Mr. Gatsby's acquaintance just after the war, I knew I'd discovered a man of fine breeding. Of all heroes, such medals. And an Oxford man. You know Oxford.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Then you would know that when it comes to married women, a man like this can be trusted. With a friend, with someone like you, he'd never so much as look at your wife.
I'm not married.
But you work on Wall Street, right?
Yes.
Looking at my typing, finest specimen of human molar.
Gentlemen? Everything all right?
Yes. We were just talking about other people's wives.
Other people's wives?
Yes.
Well,
Really?
my work here is done. I'm going to leave you gentlemen to talk about your sports and your women.
Which, teeth, right? He's got cufflinks made of human teeth. And Nick at that point is like, is this guy a dentist? Like, what does he do? It's maybe Nick playing oblivious, but it's obvious that Wolfsheim is a gangster, and maybe those teeth are, the teeth he's knocked out of some guy, right? In an alleyway fight or something. I don't know. It's romanticizing gangsters, but that's Wolfsheim's insinuating like, hey, look, you know the type of person I am. You want to listen to me when I say Gatsby is a good guy. So through the chapter, you've seen Gatsby try and impress Nick. And again, if impressing Nick doesn't work, he's going to intimidate him as well. So either way, Gatsby's like, you're going to do something for me. I'm going to ask a favor of you, and you're going to help me because you like me, or you're going to help me because you're scared of me, right? He doesn't say those things, but it's very heavily insinuated. There's a page break, and eventually Jordan is narrating for a little bit. It's the only time in the novel when someone else narrates. And Jordan essentially describes how back in 1917, she realizes that Daisy had been entertaining a young officer named J. Gatsby, right? So yes, Gatsby and Daisy once knew each other, and they had a short little summer fling together, right? And from that fling, it turns out Gatsby became obsessed, right? He wants to be with Daisy so badly, but he never can be, right? One, because he was going off to war and Daisy wouldn't wait for him, but two, because he's poor back in the day, right? He's new money. He's not like Daisy and Tom and Nick and Jordan. He's a poor kid trying to make something of himself. So Jordan describes how Daisy waited and waited for Gatsby, but he wanted to make something of himself before he ever pursued anything more serious with her after the war. So nothing ever comes of it, right? And so she, being a very kind of weak-willed person, needed her life to be shaped in some way immediately, right? And the shape or the force that shapes her life comes in the form of Tom Buchanan. And it's very heavily implied to us that their relationship, Tom and Daisy's relationship, has never been amazing. They just use each other for status and wealth and happiness in a material sense. But since their honeymoon, Tom had already been cheating on Daisy with other women, right? He cheated on Daisy with the hotel chambermaid. So Daisy's in this horrible relationship. She used to be in love with Gatsby. Gatsby still loves Daisy, and the favor that Gatsby's asking is this. Gatsby, somehow knowing that Nick is Daisy's cousin, wants Nick to ask Daisy to come over for tea one day. Not to Gatsby's big old mansion. He wants Nick to invite Daisy to his little shanty hut, and Gatsby's going to happen to be there too. It's kind of like one of these funny situations where it's like, I'm going to have a friend over for tea. Would you like to come? And then, my friends know each other. Oh, you used to love each other 5 years ago? And then Gatsby at that point could say, hey, I live right next door. Do you want to go see what I've made of myself? Right? He wants it to feel very natural. It's a super unnatural situation, but that's how childlike Gatsby almost is in his pursuit of Daisy.
It's a strange coincidence.
What is?
The fact that Gatsby's house is just across the bay.
It's no coincidence. He bought that house to be near her. He threw all those parties hoping she'd wander in one night. He constantly asked about Daisy. I was just the first person that knew her.
All that for a girl he hasn't seen in 5 years. And now he just wants me to invite her over to tea. The modesty of it.
Kind of takes your breath away.
It's a really humble ask, but then you think about some of the sinister implications underneath, right? The fact that how does Gatsby know Nick is Daisy's cousin? And then we start thinking even deeper, how did Nick end up in this small little hut right next to Gatsby, right? It's pretty coincidental that this old money type guy could find, you know, a new start in West Egg amongst millionaires all around him, and he's living in the only house like his, probably on that entire island, right? It's insane. You know, Fitzgerald, F. Scott Fitzgerald, he never dives into that in more detail, but he leaves those hints there to, I guess, have us think about the fact that, you know, it's this really sincere thing Gatsby's asking for, and it makes you kind of want to root for him. And in Chapter 5, when you see Gatsby and Daisy reacquainted, it makes you root for them even more for a little bit. But when you think about how Gatsby got to this point, it's kind of stalkerish. It's insidious a little bit. It's just, you know, his intentions are good. The way he took to get there, maybe not so much. So I'll be honest with you guys, as far as the close read goes for this chapter, not much to say. It was really like an info dump, as we call it in novels, where there's just a section of the book dedicated to revealing a lot of important information to progress the plot. So not a lot of analysis that happens here, at least not at the, you know, kind of sweeping view that we're taking of the book. But if I would point one thing to you, it's at the end of the chapter, after Jordan reveals, you know, Gatsby's request to Nick. Nick says to himself, we passed a barrier of dark trees, and then the facade of 59th Street, a block of delicate pale light beamed down into the park. Unlike Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, I had no girl whose disembodied face floated along the dark cornices and blinding signs, and so I drew up the girl beside me, tightening my arms. Her wan, scornful mouth smiled, and so I drew her up again closer, this time to my face. Fitzgerald kind of broaches the idea of comparison and how problematic it can be in all of our lives, right? Now, when we compare ourselves against other people, we inevitably bring unhappiness, right? And Nick is comparing his own love life against Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, these guys who have these illustrious love stories, or in Tom's case, just a really, you know, numerous love stories. But I don't know if you'd even call it love. But Nick is sitting there in the car with Jordan thinking, man, I wish I had something like that. You know, some girl's disembodied face floating in my mind that compels me to become a greater man and do greater things and all that kind of thing, right? So he, because of that, takes Jordan into his arms and kisses her, right? He doesn't love Jordan Baker for who she is, but for what he thinks she can do for him and for his personal pursuit of joy, right, and happiness. So that's kind of another one of the major ideas here at the book. I mean, it's on the cover, right? This idea that other people compel us to pursue our own dreams. Just a big topic that I wish we were in class to discuss, but something maybe for you to think about. And if I were to leave you with a life lesson from this chapter, as Nick learns, as Gatsby learns, as Tom learns, by the end of the novel, comparison is the enemy of progress, right? If you're constantly comparing yourself to others, you'll never be satisfied. The journey that you set needs to be one that's realistic, you know, one that is defined by your own principles and morals. And really, I think Fitzgerald's saying that's the only way we can be truly happy. So anyway, that's it for this week. We'll take a look at Chapter 5 on Wednesday. Next week, I'm going to upload videos for Chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9 all together with the questions and the reading, so you can just knock it out and be done for the year. So email if you have any questions. Have a good one. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.